You have here a chart that I'd love for you to take a minute and explain and talk about. This is from your book, Jesus, the Son of God. And I think I'm right in saying that some of your research here has really come out of years of studying the Gospel of John and noticing just the beautiful and manifold ways that not just John, but the New Testament and the Old Testament begin to speak about Christ himself.
Yeah. The book that I wrote, Jesus, the Son of God, is it's not quite popular level, but it's not really heavy academic stuff either. It's it came out of a request from some missionaries whose organizations were giving them conniptions because of the IM movement, the insider movement. Is that a known category here? The insider movement and C1 through C6, especially C5. These are ways of talking about Christian communities and so on. And increasingly there were suggestions that changes should be made in translation, especially in the Muslim world, where to speak of Jesus as being the Son of God sounds intrinsically blasphemous. The assumption is that God sleeps with Mary to produce Jesus, and the Holy Trinity is God the Father, Mary, the slut in effect, and Jesus. But some evangelicals, so-called self-defined evangelicals, were taking this on, often by saying that in many passages, Messiah has got exactly the same referent as Son of God. If it's the same referent, then use the expression that is not going to be offensive. So, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Messiah. That's not offensive. That he gave his only begotten Son is offensive. So that was a question that was becoming very common in mission agencies, and I've lectured with Wycliffe and Three Continents, and so you gradually see where these things are coming from. And so I wrote 3 lectures. It eventually morphed into a 3-chapter book, and expanded it a bit so that it dealt with more things. But that meant that the book was partly on Christology. It was partly on translation theory. Partly on some fundamental linguistic distinctions between, for example, semantics and referentiality. Now, not everybody has to worry about those kinds of things, but that's what's slipping by under the mat in this discussion. And so, as one of the examples that I used, because it was so close to the heart of this debate, I chose Son of God. And the chart on 21, what's written at the top is on the top of the page rather than the top of the chart. So the chart itself, I should have put another label on it. It's showing how son language is used in the King James Version, the first column, the Authorized Version, and then the NIV, and then the ESV, and showing how differently it can be rendered. Sons of Belial, 1 Kings 21:10, scoundrels, worthless men. Children of Belial, scoundrels, worthless men. And the children of Belial, again, the one after that, what concourse hath Christ with Belial? So I picked up a whole lot of Belial expressions to see what son and children and so on would do. And you could see considerable variation in NIV, ESV, but nobody wants to preserve Belial because it doesn't mean anything in English. It's transliteration of Semitic. And So it's, first of all, getting people used to the idea that sometimes what are viewed as faithful translations drop the form and use a similar expression. And then on pages 23 to 24, there is another chart. And this one, instead of focusing on Belial, is focusing on sons language. Son of 1 year, sons of the beating, sons of might, son of a murder, sons of the singers, sons of a flame, son of a bow, and so on, so on, so on. And in the King James Version, the NIV, the ESV, the son language is virtually always gone. Son of a murderer is simply a murderer. Sons of might, a mighty man, a fighter. Son of 1 year, a male of the first year. Year-old males. And then sons of the singers, musicians. Sons of a flame, sparks. Son of a bow, an arrow. So in each case you can figure out where that's coming from, but it's not preserving the initial language. It's preserving a semantic equivalent. And so the result of all of this is that in further discussion in the book itself, I went to all the places where Son of God or Sons of God came out. And then you discover that for Son of God or Sons of God, you have things like angels, as in Job 1. The sons of God came to see God. And they're angels, clearly in the context, including demonic angels. Sometimes Son of God means a believer in some sense, a disciple of God. Sometimes it's generic for an Israelite. The expression means a lot of different things in different contexts. And so just because Jesus is called Son of God doesn't mean that they're saying he's divine. No, it might, but you got to see what the context is. And so it's an attempt to try to clear the air by showing what variations there are at the translation level. So that was part of the first chapter of the book, and I thought it might be a useful exercise to go through some of those things and look at them yourself if you have questions that you want to raise about them. Sons of a fortune teller, you children of a sorceress.
Now, as you pursued this further, and it affected, like you hinted at a minute ago, this started to had implications for interpreting New Testament texts as well.
Of course.
When it came to Christ.
Yep.
What did that look like? And the question I really want to get to is, since writing this, have you heard back from that context? Any of those missionaries to Muslims, how has it landed?
Well, some of them saw a draft and made some criticism, some suggestions, and I made it minor. I didn't change anything. I made it tighter.
Okay.
Some people have learned from it, and Wycliffe has changed his policy. It's back closer to the original.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
But some people were very angry at me. I had my share of hate literature.
And why was that? What was behind their...
They would say that what's behind it is I was adopting policies that made it harder to do evangelism.
I see.
And my response to them was always the same thing. I'm not sure you're doing evangelism. By that time, there had been some research done showing what percentage of those who made professions of faith under the IM movement, the insider movement stuff, what percentage of those people continued as Christians. And it was pathetically small. Quite a few of them, I've forgotten what percentage, but it was a significant, 58%, something like that, still preferred to read the Quran to the Bible.
Do you think this is because, let me connect the dots here, is this primarily because the evangelism that was taking place was not actually taking the
Correct.
fullness of who Christ is.
They didn't learn enough about who Christ was to be offended by him.
Yeah. For him to be scandalous.
Yeah, that's right. And it's just as if you're ashamed of the glory of the cross, which is another thing that devout Muslims don't want. They want to say that Jesus died on the cross, but the Christ lived on. At least some do. They're broken into different camps. So the result is that I was brought up in French Canada, in a highly, highly Catholic society. Quebec, when I was growing up, was considered the most Catholic nation. That's what the French use of nation is a little bit different. The Catholic nation in the world, as measured by the numbers of priests and nuns that they were sending out as missionaries. And we learned in that context that you didn't get conversion to an evangelical view of the faith and of justification and of who Christ was. And so you didn't get that kind of clear conversion until somebody actually did understand so well that they were offended by it.
And that's hard for us.
And then change.
Here.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
It's not just them over there. That's when we are presenting and talking to someone about Jesus here.
Yeah. The reasons are different, but
Yes.
we live in a world which, in theory, wants tolerance. It's not very tolerant about those who disagree with it.
You think from that experience, maybe especially from some of that hate mail, for some people that might lead them to back away from Christology.
Yeah.
Right? Especially when we're looking at some very technical uses that we're getting in the weeds, looking at very specific uses in text that might seem at first glance unrelated, but the cumulative testimony of them by the time you get to Christ in the New Testament is powerful. Some might back away from that either because of those evangelistic consequences, or maybe we experience this some here in the States. Theology, Christology with it. It's just not necessary to think about the church.
Jesus said, turn the other cheek. You're not turning the other cheek. What's the matter with you?
Yeah. So how do we recover Christology so that it's not just this secondary thing, but it actually is in that people's minds?
Teach it. And you want to do it in such a way that you're not being obstreperous for the sake of being obstreperous. You're not just out to win a fight. You still aim to be winsome and so on, but until people see what is at issue, what does conversion mean? Conversion presupposes you're turning from one position to another position. If there's no new position to turn to, what does conversion mean?
Todd, do you also think that knocking on the door of Christology here, and I'm thinking as a theologian in particular, so you'll have to indulge me a minute. Because in my experience, Christology, you learn it in seminary. It's not necessarily carried over, whether it is into the church. There can be an emphasis on we need to reach those in our neighborhood, but doctrine is something we checked off once upon a time in membership.
To get your license.
Could Christology, and why stop there, right? The fullness of who God is, the Trinity, the attributes of God, etc., etc. And your experience this through hate mail in the missionary context, but in the church itself, when you say teach it, What does that look like? What does that, for the pastor, what does that mean?
It means that when you're expounding texts, not all the time, but sometimes you expound how they bear on contemporary discussion, on contemporary positions, on what is denied. And I wouldn't want you to think that all the hate mail was just from Catholics. I mean, we did certain things with the Gospel Coalition that attracted enormous hate mail from nominal Christians.
On this same issue?
No, all kinds of issues. All kinds of issues. Because we live at a time in the Western world when the one thing that you cannot easily say is that somebody else is wrong. That's changing again. But 10 years ago, that was universal in the Western world. The one thing that's wrong is to say that somebody else is wrong. How do you teach the New Testament unless you're prepared to say that some things are right and some things are wrong? So you want to do it winsomely and all of that, but at the end of the day,
Has to be said.
some things have to be said.
Has to be said.